This Wednesday's glossary term is Verstehen, the German word Verstehen. We're nearing the end of our whole glossary, all in video form. It's very exciting. Just a few more weeks. We're up to V, Verstehen. So Verstehen is the German word for understanding that has been used commonly in continental philosophy, that is philosophy from the European continent as opposed to Great Britain, to refer to the inherent understanding that consciousness has of its own projects. To carry out a project of any kind, we must inherently grasp the meaning of our intentions prior to any thought about the project as a rational task. To even walk across the street, we must, with understanding, synthesize all of our movements toward the realization of our action through a pre-reflective grasp of the action's direction and meaning. The word Verstehen roughly corresponds to my use of the word grasp, in chapter 8 especially. All right, so let's start with the example of walking across the street, and then go to a deeper example involving human beings, so social reality. Regarding walking across the street, so when we walk across the street, it's not the case that we approach walking across the street as rational beings who have calculated the necessary time and space to get to the other side based on the relative speed per hour of our bodies, and therefore on the basis of that rational knowledge have decided to take the first step. It's possible to do that afterwards, but when we actually cross the street, we grasp right from the outset that what our project is to walk across the street, and we understand that. And in understanding that, we make use of everything available to us intuitively to get across the street, like our arms, legs, sense of other cars, the feeling of the wind, our own sense of balance, all these things. And those are totalized, as Jean-Paul Sartre would put it, totalized toward the realization of the project. Now, the point of Verstehen is that we understand what we are doing, even though we are not conscious of it, even though we are not thinking about it like a rational person. We understand it and we totalize it. In the words of the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, he would say that unlike rational scientific thought, where reality is frozen and you break it into parts like time and space and other such, let's say, physicalized manifestations of the world. Unlike that, if you are intuitively understanding a project, you act on the basis. The project has what Heidegger called a towards which, always. A towards which is a basic structure of the being of a project. And to continue to use Heidegger's terminology, everything that you use to get across the street is what he would call ready to hand, meaning part of the synthesis of arms, legs, movement, sense of the cars coming the other way, wind, the weather, all of that is understood in the realization of the project. So the project has an intention that is always understood. And the point of the idea of Verstehen in that example is, oh, here's another, I forgot. If he's talking about space, what physics would normally call the space of crossing the street, in existential terms or phenomenological terms, Heidegger says the space is desevered. What does he mean by that? He means there is no space between the walker and getting to the other side, because the project has already realized that in intuition. So you're there already. That's what's guiding you to get there from a experiential or phenomenological point of view. Well, if you're interested in philosophy, that's the sort of thing you could think about. But if we apply this same kind of awareness of understanding or Verstehen to a human project, think of trying to understand a Nazi. I'm going to take something of a stereotype of a Nazi: Siegheil, eyes glassy, committed to their Führer, feeling the German fatherland. This guy, think of him. Now, how do we understand him? Well, from the standpoint of Verstehen, of understanding, we have to go inside that person and grasp what is happening to their consciousness. What is their consciousness intending? And we can actually see that the real person is withdrawn deep inside, that a persona is being enacted on the outside, that the eyeballs are ocular globes with a fixated gaze or glare, and that there's a participation in an imaginary fatherland that we are all part of, that is reflected in the being of the Nazi, of the person who is like that. Verstehen is both internal to the Nazi's reality. The Nazi knows what he's doing, however unconsciously. He knows it because he's enacting it. He's enacting a withdrawal of his true self, probably because he's afraid of other people. And he's then carrying out an imaginary self on the outside with all these features. So Verstehen describes both what he understands underneath everything of what he's doing, his project to address his fear of the other by becoming a hyper cathected, hyper linked imaginary figure that's part of a hyper idealized community. And Verstehen refers to the work of the interpreter, of someone who's trying to illuminate this for others, to illuminate this description that I've just given. I hope illuminates the meaning of the Nazis' action by identifying with him and engaging in a grasp of what he is really up to, and then trying to describe that in terms that illuminate something that is otherwise hard to see, that's otherwise opaque. That's the work of illumination. That's the result of a projected understanding, a different kind of knowledge from rational scientific knowledge, a spiritual knowledge that begins from the spirit of the describer, reaching into the spirit of the person being described, using the same being that I have. I'm making use of that being, you could say, to go inside the Nazi in this case and illuminate what's really going on inside. That's the meaning of Verstehen, or understanding. It's in German philosophy, and to the little I use it in this book, it's a more central, more important, you could say, more foundational aspect of knowledge than rational scientific knowledge, which is built on top of that Verstehen. After you understand the project of crossing the street and you've described it, then you can calculate what's the most efficient, rational way to accomplish that goal. So, Verstehen. Ich verstehe. I understand.